Hi everybody, I'm Austin Eischeid from Austin Eischeid Garden Design. I was asked to do a shade garden out here at Northwind Perennial Farm this spring, and there's a video earlier about the installation and the layout of that and the design. And so here I wanted to talk about, and we're going to check out and get a little update and see how things are looking over there, and just kind of wanted to talk about some of the struggles we all have in shade and maybe some other plants that you can add for fall color. Here over at the shade retail area at Northwind, and a few plants that I noticed that are great for this time of year are Aster Divaricatus. They are upright, a great aster about a foot tall, and the aster has a gorgeous fluffy seed head after it's done blooming, lasts through the winter. It is a reseeder, so this is a great plant to add to the garden, you know, maybe the second or third year once the plants have established and cover the ground more, so that the seeding of the aster isn't so prolific and goes everywhere. So if you put it in later, once the garden's more matured, then it'll kind of stay in its spot, and you might see a few pop up here and there, and maybe they go in a spot that you'd like them, or you can always take them away and you're the artist of the garden. And another great one is the anemones. And so here there's a whole range of pink and white anemones. And this is a great one if you have a little bit more light into your shade garden. This isn't really great for dark shade, but this is one that blooms September, October, and also has a beautiful cotton seed head after it's done blooming, and will bloom for about a month. So it's got, you know, gorgeous foliage, gives you some nice height in the shade, about 3 foot tall. And as I said, this one likes a little bit more moisture and can tolerate a little bit more sunshine. Another great plant to add to your fall shade garden is Trisertis toad lily. And this one I just think is so special because it looks like a little orchid. When you look up close, there's a ton of detail, and it's just a really special flower that you really don't expect to see in a garden here in the Midwest. And it has lots of little tiny dainty flowers, and many of them. And it is probably a September, October flower, and about 3 foot tall. This one they have here is called Sonomi. It is one of my favorites. And it's just got beautiful foliage, kind of a soft, hairy, nice opposite leaf arrangement on the foliage, and just looks good all summer long, but adds that late season color, which we all struggle to have. So this is a great addition to dot through your landscape and to also add a little bit of height. And coming up through the carex, it just kind of spices up your shade garden. So adding 3 or 5 in small groups throughout is a great addition. The carex is another really great texture to add to shade gardens. I love to kind of get your basics put down, do your Trisertis, kind of get something for each season, do blocks of that or scatter them about, and then when you can come in and all of the blank space in between to cover the ground and to suppress those weeds, add the texture with different carexes. There's different tones of like the lime green here with the carex little midge. You've got Carex albicans, which is like a really rich green, and it kind of carries its green through the winter as well, so semi-evergreen. And then there's ones like the gracillima here that have a wider blade, so the different textures together really play well, so you can use 3, 4, 5 different carexes throughout, and that is going to look good all year for you. So it's really an invaluable plant to add to the garden. And Flocka here is a blue-green, silver tones to it, so it's another great one to add to the other greens and yellows, because you have all those different rich textures. And like I said, in shade, the importance of texture is huge, because I find that the spring is really when you get that big wow factor, because a lot of our spring native shade plants all bloom from April until about June time. So that's when you really get your flower power. So you got to really understand the texture and the seed heads of the shade plants to fully appreciate the shade garden. Here's the shade garden that we put in early summer, and it's looking really good. Things have survived really well, and it's been a really tough summer here in the Midwest. It's been very dry. So when you put a garden in late spring, early summer, you kind of expect plants to kind of sit and stay alive and kind of do more root growth. And so a lot of the things have grown pretty well and have actually a lot of new foliage. And the heuchera, the Japanese forest grass, Hakonocloa, looks really, really nice. And the Caryx albicans, that just shows how resilient the plant is. We put those in as plugs, and they've grown 10 times the size that they were this spring. So that's really a testament to Caryx. Like I said, that's a great plant to kind of weave through. And we have the laxicolmus, which is the silvery blue texture, and that is, so those two Caryxes play really well to each other because they have totally different colored foliage and different textures. One's a really fine blade, one is more has more width to it, and the hostas have kind of sat, and so that's going to be our larger texture for more dominant feature in the garden here. And one of my favorites, as I've told you before, is the heuchera watermelon carnival. Adds a lot of color and really rich, dark, reds. And in the cooler season is when that pinks and reds really come out in it. And so in the summer, they kind of fade out into a more orangey color. And then now the rich tones of red and pink are really coming in and to their own. And polygonatums, we put in, those are really looking nice, and next year they'll really get taller and more, having that arch and that texture and form is really important to have that architectural form coming out of the Caryx. And that different leaf texture, again, is really important to play with in the shade, because there's nothing blooming in here right now, but there's still a lot happening with the different arching grasses. The Hakonocloa is arching over really softly, and the Caryx albicans is more of a bunch grass, and so that's kind of splaying out like a wig, like a crazy troll wig. And same with the laxicolmus. And then we have like I said, the different tones of the red with the heuchera, add that punch of color all season long, even in the winter. I've seen it at February 1st during the Arctic blast, still holding on to that color, which is wonderful. We have the seed heads of the pink sparkling stars, Strontia. So overall, I'm really happy with it. It looks great. And I think it's really good to see the garden through the first year and kind of leave it the way you had it, to see how things fill in the second year, and then maybe do some additions then. And we'll talk about that more soon. Yeah, so now that we've had a few months to digest the garden that we installed in early summer, now, it's time that you can start thinking about some additions. Maybe you found something, you kind of have a little bit of a quiet space in the garden that you maybe want something that's flowering or a different texture. And one I had just found that's great is the Trisertis cynomi. And this is a fall bloomer. Like I said, a gorgeous orchid-like flower, tons of detail when you look really close, beautiful speckling, and lots of flowers, blooms for about a month. And so I like to use these as like small clumps in the shade. And so we have the matrix of Caryx. And so this is a great one to kind of pop in between the matrix. So here we have the laxicolmus Caryx, and popping these in little clumps of like 3 here, 5 here, because of the size and scale of the garden. This is, maybe doing small groups, 3, 5, 7 max is good through here. You could even pop one of these, into the Hakonocloa, and then you have that color pop, that beautiful pink just popping out, kind of looks like the grass is flowering, popping out of the Hakonocloa in the fall. So that is one of the additions that I would like to add in here. And sometimes it's great to wait for another season to see how much you want to add, because there's things that haven't quite gone to their full potential. Like in here I have the geranium tiny monster, which has kind of sat through the summer and hasn't grown a lot, but has put on a lot of root growth. And so next year, if I put the cynomi next to it, it's going to swallow it, and if I didn't quite realize that was there. So it's really good to kind of evaluate your garden for 1 year, see what things are really growing, how they're filling in, and then maybe finding a little area that you're like, oh, I got some potential here that we could add some of the toad lilies in year 2, and then the next year you might want to add in more of something that you don't think that you have enough of, and you could add in some anemones depending on your light. But the toad lilies are great for shade, to part shade. garden. So it's a really nice one to add some color into your fall season in the shade. So one of the edits I would make with some of the plants that I chose this when we did the install is Heuchera Watermelon Carnival. We put about 3 to 5 groups of 3 in, and now after seeing it, after it's been sitting for a few months, I think adding a few more to a couple groups and kind of making them a little off balance, and do like 1 group of 5 or 2 groups of 5, 3 groups of 3, and so I would add a couple more over here and maybe a couple more to a group over there to add more volume, because it looks a little sparse right now with 3 in a group within the context of the sizes of the other groups here. So I would definitely add, even another group back here to brighten up the back of the border. It would be nice to have some of that color pop back there. And it just, that different color and texture of the Heuchera adds more dimension and volume to a shade garden, and kind of breaks up the different greens as well. So the Heuchera villosas are some of my favorite Heucheras. So if you can find a Heuchera with the species villosa, those are the ones that are going to be long-lived, hardy for our winters, and come back year after year. Because there's been a lot of new ones that have been on the market that don't quite make it, and they're more of an annual and serve that color for a season. But some of the villosas really you can count on to come back year after year, and there's a huge selection here at Northwind. So we used polygonatums in the shade garden, and here's a mature specimen nearby, and I love to use them because of that gorgeous shape kind of coming out, kind of brushing passerbyers. And then underneath, what's great is the bell-shaped white flowers in the spring turn into these gorgeous black berries, almost like blueberries, in clusters of 3 to 5 underneath the foliage, and it's just a beautiful addition. And then once the fall color comes, is this gorgeous soft butter gold color, and it's just so many other seasons of interest. Great when it comes up in the spring, great architecture all year long, and then the berries hold on through the summer, and the gold fall color, you can't really beat it. Another addition we had is the Twilight Aster, and here it's a great clump forming. It's got rhizomes, so it will create a really nice grouping. So it's a great plant to have as a, if you put multiple ones together. It's not one you really dot through, you can, but since it's more of a rhizomatous creature, it does better in its own when it grows next to one another. So here, we're talking about fall now and seed heads. This is an incredible one that it just bloomed a few weeks ago, and it gets this beautiful puffball flower or seed head on top, and then once that gets carried away by the wind, then it has this beautiful straw-like star-shaped flower. And so I would think that's maybe why they called it Twilight, is in a beautiful evening sky. And all winter long, this holds its structure, and when it creates kind of a dome, when everything grows together after 3 years, then you see just like a sea of these beautiful tiny little stars, and when that kind of fused light in the winter hits it, it just kind of makes them shine. And so you got some snow around it, and then that straw color of the seed head really just shines, and is really important to think about that. As we've heard Pete and Roy say, brown is a color too. So these seed heads are just a really important winter structure element to a shade garden. Another great seed head is a Strontia. This is pink sparkling stars. A Strontia is great because when it blooms, whether it's the burgundy colors, white or soft pink, pink sparkling stars is the soft pink one that I chose for here. And that once they bloom, they just last for so long, and then they kind of fade out to the soft pink, softer pink, and then white, and then they kind of go to this soft brown tone and dry on there, and it's a really great texture. As I've got them dotted through the carex matrix here, and that's a really nice feature to think about and make sure you leave up and don't deadhead once this is done blooming. Another controversy that we have, and question I get all the time about shade gardens, is how do I grow anything underneath my black walnuts? And that is a false accusation that you hear from generation to generation, and it's not true. So this is actually a forest of black walnuts, and things are growing beautifully. And Roy has gardens throughout here that have been growing for decades and decades of all the shade plants that he grows. So that is definitely false information, and that's, you know, definitely don't let people keep telling you that, and try something new, try different things that you thought you hadn't been able to try before, and know that they go well together, and there might be a few things that don't work, but overall we've used, you know, 15 different species here, and they all seem to be very happy and thriving. All in all, I'm really happy with everything and how the gardens turned out here in the shade here at Northwind, and you know, we'll do a few additions, add a few more carex in some spots, and a few of the other flowering plants that we talked about to add a little bit more fall interest. And then we'll take a look again next year and see how everything's coming along and update you then. So thanks a lot for coming to check us out. Come to Northwind and have a look for yourself.